We're live. Oh, we're live. Hello and welcome to Midweek Mochas at the Owlery. If you've been homeschooling for a while, you've probably run into some difficulties with how to order your school day. Laura, I'm pretty sure you have a tale or two to tell.
I have better than a tale. I have a visual aid.
She has a visual.
That was one of the saner schedules I put together. And I've tried a number of approaches, from color-coded Excel sheets to hyper-detailed like a bullet journal for each child.
That was painful.
Yeah, the struggle is real.
It absolutely is. What we've learned from it is going to be the subject of today's show. Whether this is your first rodeo and you're trying to figure out the scheduling for one child, or you've tried everything under the sun and you have a passel of kids like we do, this week's show should help you bring some sanity to your schedule.
Yes. So let's first start with, why is your schedule insane?
That is an excellent question, Laura.
And why it's insane, probably because it's overloaded. I remember once upon a time we had a joke on a board about being the well-drained mom. Because
yes.
There's just this day that never ended. You're coming up on dinner time and you're still trudging through stuff. And there's a few reasons. A lot of them are based in fear. One of them is the good old fear of missing out. You've got things, and you know what the basic things that you need to be doing in school are, but you've got this sense, either you went to a curriculum fair and you saw something beautiful and you got excited about it, or someone was talking about what their child was doing in school, and all of a sudden it's like, but they're not doing that. Should we be doing that? And then you try to cram it in.
Well, and you've also got a situation where a lot of people start homeschooling. They're like, okay, well, what's the school doing? Let me duplicate that. That way, if this doesn't work out, they have to go back into school, they're not going to end up being behind, they won't feel stigmatized. And there's a comfort with, well, what was schooling like when I was a kid? Yeah. Well, you went to a building for 7 to 10 hours a day. You sat in an uncomfortable chair at an uncomfortable desk that was probably made of laminated particle board, or it actually may have even been made of plywood. And a teacher walked back and forth, and you did work out of textbooks, and you did work in consumable, disposable workbooks, and maybe some loose leaf work.
Ditto Masters. We had Ditto Masters.
Well, yeah, we're old enough to have had Ditto Masters,
yes.
But I fear for a lot of our audience here, they're not going to know what a Ditto Master was.
Oh, okay, that is fair. I think they were phasing them out. So any of you who are not Gen Xers, okay, it was probably mimeograph.
I love you. Anyway, there's a tendency when you're starting out homeschooling to, all right, well, let's just replicate the classroom experience.
Yeah, and there's a sense of comfort in that,
it's familiar to you, it's what your child is kind of expecting, and it looks normal, and that desire to look normal and not miss a subject is a really, really big driver of why we start off with overloaded schedules. And this isn't a one and done kind of thing. Like, I know every year we struggle with, okay, well, we want to do this, and there's this other thing, and then, it's very easy to have that scope creep occur.
Yeah, scope creep is a very real thing.
It's not just for corporate shenanigans.
So, another fear comes into someone in authority that you're afraid of not pleasing. That, you've got the sense of, it has to look like school, otherwise someone, and it's a vague someone. You may not even know who it is that you're concerned with, but you might be concerned someone's not going to be happy if your school doesn't look like school. And so you get locked into certain ideas. Maybe it's having to have school on certain days of the week. Maybe it's teaching school between certain hours. Now, it may be reasonable that, you don't have your kids, running off to the grocery store during school hours. Okay.
Yeah, we clearly no longer live in a world where a 7-year-old can be sent to pick up a pack of cigarettes at the corner store. I grew up in that world, so yeah. I miss that world. It was a better world. But anyway.
Yes. But it could be that. It could be teaching certain subjects or teaching those subjects in a certain way. You may agree that something has to be taught, but is the technique or the way you're teaching it the only way it needs to be done? And you may be thinking, this is the way it has to be taught because that's how it's taught in school. And so that's a kind of thing that can lead you into something that's more time consuming or leaves you stuck at a desk longer. And those kind of fears can overwhelm you.
That's a fear that was really more one that you've grappled with than I did.
You went to a school that didn't do things that way.
I did,
and that was a perspective change.
Well, for middle school, I was in a very experimental school in Philadelphia, and that had a very, very significant impact on my openness to question the standard. Otherwise I was in parochial schools, at least up until high school, which is its own complicated story. But, there's a regimentation in the parochial school, in the private school, in the college prep track curriculum. And then when I went to the Philadelphia school in the early 90s, that was the very late 80s, early 90s. It was an experimental school, and things were done very, very, very differently. And that certainly opened me up to the possibility that even within the realm of institutional schooling, there wasn't one true way in order to execute all of this sort of thing.
And the understanding that the whole point of an experimental school is you're experimenting with different methods of teaching, recognizing that there may be, in fact, an optimal way, but that doesn't mean that the way everyone's doing it is the optimal way.
Well, you have to prescind from the idea that the way everyone's doing it is the optimal way, and I think we were planning to talk about that at some point this morning.
I think we are. But a few other things that tend to create that schedule overload. One, you do need to have order in your day, and a schedule is an easy way to create a sense of order.
Whether or not you as an adult crave order, and there are certainly some who do and some who don't, and some who crave more order than others, children are desperate for it. A lot of toddler temper tantrums, a lot of young child acting out is simply a desperate cry to impose order and structure, because order and structure, reliably consistent patterns of language and behavior, are what reassure a child that they're loved and give them the stability and safe. Loved and safe. And once a human person is in a position of love and safety, once they feel loved and they feel safe and comfortable, then they're willing to experiment and grow. They'll push boundaries in different ways. But absent that, they will push those boundaries until they find, where's the line I can't cross.
And order is one of those things that helps create that sense of security and that need for predictability. But a rigid schedule is not the only way to do that. But one of the ways...
a rigid schedule is a terrible way to do that. It's you've got the deficiency of too little structure, and you've got the excess of too much structure. And it's not that the point in the middle is correct, it's that there's a cure, which is an ordered and disciplined way of living.
And more importantly, that there is the ideal of order, but that order can be achieved in multiple ways. And the way I think of this it's kind of like flower arranging. You've got a way of flower arranging where you can have everything nice and symmetrical.
Right.
But there are other...
And that's a very Occidental approach.
But I had a little bit of instruction in Japanese flower arranging, and it looks very different.
Is that...
Ikebana, I think. I'm not...
Ikebana? Something
don't
like that?
Quote me on that.
Okay, yeah, my Japanese is even worse than my Greek.
But regardless, it's still balanced, but it is not symmetrical. And that's when you realize that there's more than one way to have things balanced. And similarly, a schedule can be ordered, but not every ordered schedule is going to look the same way.
Correct. And it will. And in a smaller one-room schoolhouse, which is essentially what you're taking on running, regardless of how many or how few children you have, that's really, you need to look to that model rather than the model you may have experience with from your own upbringing, that your spouse or your grandparents or whatever may be more comfortable with.
And that brings us to the last one, which is that school schedules, as you've probably experienced them, whether it was, arrived on the first day of high school to get a list of what are your classrooms and what's the order of when you're going to classes, and you've got like 50 minutes in a room and 10 minutes to get to the next room.
A days, B days, rotating schedules, or even that very standard grammar school schedule of, you show up at 7:30 or 8 in the morning.
Thursday we go to art class. On these days we have gym, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
All of those are artifacts of modern schooling. They presume a few things. One, they presume...
And by modern, let's stress that in this case, that's like the 20th century.
Yes, just the 20th century. One of the things they are presuming is a large staff with specialized knowledge. You've got teachers who only handle one grade area. You've got... or a subject area. So you've got the music teacher, you've got the second grade teacher, you've got the history teacher, and he only does American history.
You got the PE teacher.
Yeah. Then you've got janitors who are keeping the building clean and handling all of the spills and the messes. You've got administrators who are taking care of the paperwork. You've got cooks who are making sure that the cafeteria is running. That schedule presumes all of that is running.
If you go to a religious school and there's chapel, you have a dedicated clerical staff who manage all the chapel activities.
There's usually a nurse on staff to handle medical emergencies. You've got all of these people that allow you to spend 50 to 55 minutes.
They allow the teacher in the institutional school to focus on the teaching. Mm-hmm. And then that person has to go home to his or her home and cook and clean and take care of the pets and take care of the children and so on and so forth.
In the very limited chunk of day that they're there.
Right.
But as far as the school day goes, you've got this ability to... The thing to keep in mind is that would be kind of like if you've watched a show like Downton Abbey or seen a movie or like Upstairs, Downstairs, to, again, date us.
Gosford Park wasn't made that long ago.
No.
It's only 20 odd years.
Yeah, and Downton Abbey's actually pretty recent.
It's really almost a quarter century since Gosford Park came
Yes.
out. Wow.
Anyways, all of those movies and shows about English great houses where you've got this massive, massive staff. If you tried to run your housekeeping schedule the way you have a schedule of keeping house in a house that has, multiple footmen and maids and all of these people keeping it running, you're going to drive yourself nuts.
And more importantly, you can't live like the people upstairs when you're the one who has to do all the stuff downstairs in order to provide that life.
Exactly. And you're setting yourself up for failure. And similarly, you can't imitate a school and the way a school runs a schedule because you don't have the staff. The other artifact of modern life, though, is actually the purpose of the school.
Yes. And unfortunately, modern schooling is rooted in an industrial and anti-human set of assumptions and processes. It emerges out of the Prussian military experience in how they were dealing with conscript soldiers. The grading system of A is a good shot down to F, failure is a terrible shot and shouldn't ever be handed a firearm in an actual critical situation. And then you sort the graded conscripts into training based on how well or poorly they can shoot. And that then gets embraced and transformed in the late 19th, early 20th century, and glommed onto by lunatics like John Dewey, who did incalculable harm in trying to create a system that is designed to produce people who are neither educated nor competent. And that's really the basis for the institutional schooling system that we know and love today, and that we, for the most part, experienced in our own upbringing, and that is now being inflicted on our children. It is a system of brainwashing, and it is a system of indoctrination.
But more importantly, what it's doing is it's treating as children as something like either raw materials or fungible parts.
Yes.
And the grading is quality control, and the schedule is not unlike first you have the product at station A, and then it gets moved to station B,
It's an assembly line.
Yes.
The modern school schedule is essentially an assembly line designed by efficiency experts who didn't believe there was anything particularly remarkable about any given individual human person.
So, what is the cure to this problem? What's the practical stuff that you can start doing to bring some sanity back?
How do you deload your schedule? Once you've recognized these problems, how do you take stuff out while still dealing with, well, we've got these subjects we have to cover, and there's these things we want to do, and there's this direction we want to go.
Right. So, first starting point, mold the process to the person, not the person to the process. If you think back to that industrial problem, the problem was you were treating all of the children as interchangeable, and people aren't. There are everything from different talents and capacities to
different temperaments,
different sleep-wake cycles.
All of these should influence how you structure the home education adventure within your own home.
So that crazy schedule I showed you at the very beginning, all those giant blocks of stuff, well, I was pulling it out when we were doing show prep, and one of my children looks at me and says, it was a great schedule, until I couldn't wake up that early anymore.
And he's the one with he's easily the one with the most desperate need for order and structure.
He loves order and structure.
You give him a checklist and he will just follow it to the letter.
Oh, yes. And that he likes having that sense of when are things going to happen and what are we going to be doing. But
does not adapt to changing circumstances very well.
No, we've got a couple like that.
Can't imagine where that comes from.
Yeah, can't imagine. So
I derailed you. I'm sorry.
You have derailed me.
Molding the process to the person, not the person to the process, means looking before the modern era to a much older approach to education, and it's one that you as a parent are already doing. Think about how you handle the transgressions of a toddler versus the transgressions of an 8 or 10-year-old. Presumably, there's a difference in how you handle those situations.
Yeah. It means things like taking a look at, do you need to have your coffee before you're actually able to think clearly, handle disputes and problems? Don't start school before you've had your coffee. Don't feel locked into, well, all of the other kids in the neighborhood by 8:30 in the morning have ridden a bus and are already in a building. If you don't really wake up until 10, your school day starts at 10.
Or after.
No
reason it can't start after lunch.
Yeah.
And be over by dinner.
And you can have...
Even for high schoolers.
And you can have things that occupy that morning. You can let them know that, in the morning until 10, here's what you should do for your breakfast, and here are your chores, and I'm awake and ready to do classes at 10:30.
To summarize, your schedule in your own homeschool environment needs to reflect where your child is at and meet them. And it also needs to reflect where you are at and meet you. And that schedule should emerge out of really a conversation. And it's not necessarily like you sit, little Johnny down, little Johnny, we need to do these things. And Johnny's like, I just want to play Minecraft. Well, yes, Johnny just wants to play Minecraft. Yeah. You can get creative about how you use Minecraft. That's a subject for another show. But as far as finding a schedule where you cover those things,
yeah,
and we'll get into that as well, but you want to reflect on where you are, reflect on where they are, and where you're both trying to get to.
Yeah.
And then figure out what's going to work for all of you. There are definitely periods of the year where we're like, you know what? It's not even worth trying to do schooling this next couple of weeks. We've got X and Y and Z, and, maybe the weather's going to be really pleasant. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we're just going to not have school. We had some things happen, and that's fine. You are in charge of those decisions. No one can tell you have to school these specific days and these specific times within these days. No one has that authority.
No, you may have a state requirement that says so many hours or days per year.
Okay, so keep track of the hours and days if you really want to.
No one says that those days can't be in June and July when it's too dang hot, and except for the week that you're at the beach, you're doing school stuff. It's actually a great way to deal with some.
No one says that Saturday morning taekwondo or soccer isn't countable as PE. It is.
Yes.
So that 4 hours you spend on Saturday morning watching your kid chase a little speckled ball or teaching them golf. I knew one guy who took his kid out to play golf with him on Saturday mornings.
That's great. And that is PE. I mean, if you've got if you live in a place that's cold and you can ski in the winter, you've got PE.
Yeah, you
days.
take a ski trip to, I don't know, what are ski destinations?
I don't know. There's so many of them, and I've never
okay.
been to any because I don't like putting myself on little sticks and hurling myself down mountains.
Not a fan of cold, so
No, neither of us are.
So yeah, absolutely. Mold the process to the person, not the person to the process. Do the minimum. Do the minimum is the next key.
Yes.
Because when any of us, when we're starting out, we're like, oh, I need to do this, and I need to do this, and this, and this, and this, and maybe you've got a list of state requirements, or you're dealing with a high schooler, and you're like, well, I have to create a transcript, and how do I get my homeschooler into college if they don't have a transcript that looks like my high school transcript, but with better grades, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And take a deep breath. It's all bullshit. Throw it out.
So, starting point, figure out what the actual minimum is. So this summer, we decided we had got through all of the camps that we were doing.
We'd gotten through the few summer camps the kids did.
Yeah, we had a number of day camps that ate up mornings
Yeah.
and some swim lessons and things. We reached the end of those.
And we hit the stretch of 2 months of 100-degree plus days.
Yeah.
The pool, the pool at the local Y wasn't reliably open because of staffing issues.
Yeah.
So the kids were sitting around the house, bored out of their frickin' minds.
And there's only so much Minecraft I want them playing.
Yeah, and there's only so many stupid videos from the library you want to check out either.
Yes, you get.
So what we did, as we so frequently do in Texas when the temperatures get so hot that the squirrels melt and the children don't want to emerge from the cold darkness of the air-conditioned interior, is we decided it was time to start school. And so for 2 blissful months, we had them get up every day, because that's their schedule, and work through the checklists that we gave them, and they got a bunch of schoolwork done.
And the way we handled it is we put together a checklist for each child with what
The bare minimum.
And we had figured out what is the bare minimum for our family, the things that absolutely, positively must be done. For one child, it's really getting and reading strongly. So reading lessons, handwriting, and some of the memorization work he does. Mm-hmm. And for him, that was where he's at. For one of our older children, he had a wider schedule, and he loaded some stuff on top for himself.
Yes.
Because he was interested in it and wanted to have the structure of reminding himself daily that he was doing it.
Right.
But for each child, we were focusing primarily on language arts and mathematics. Language arts does include foreign language. And
Latin in particular. Latin's a non-negotiable for us. It may not be for you.
correct.
So basically they had some handwriting, they had some reading in English, they had some grammar work, some poetry, memorization. They had a little bit of maths, and then they had their Latin.
Yeah.
And I think that was pretty much the whole.
Yeah. And it was a very bare bones schedule.
If it took them an hour
for the
in the morning.
For the older ones, there was probably about 2 hours of work, which is appropriate.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. You're going to have a different range. For a small child, there should not be a whole lot of their day eaten up.
20 to 30 minutes for the whole day.
If they're focused, they should be able to get through it fairly quickly.
And there are some days where you're just like, okay, you know what? Go play. Just go play.
But for the most part, we figured out what are the things that absolutely positively must be done. Do those.
And then occupy yourselves how you choose.
And then the other thing to keep in mind is that those subject areas, language arts, maths, they're servants. They are not the point of school. They are what makes real education possible.
Yes.
Because real education is, our next point, get out of the classroom.
Education comes from the Latin educare. Ducare is from duco, ducere, duxi, ductum, meaning to lead, as in to lead men into battle, to lead, not to govern a ship, that's a different word. But and the E on the front of it is out from. So educare is to lead out from. And so even in the Latin root, you have a reference to Plato's cave, and the idea of leading people from a world of illusion and ignorance out into the real world where they encounter real sunlight, real leaves on real trees, real grass under their feet. Not unlike the kind of thought experiment that C.S. Lewis does in The Great Divorce. And with that as context, that's a lot of what you as a parent are called to do when you embrace home education, especially once you get through that initial, all right, we're transitioning from a school to doing this. We've been doing this a little while, and we're like, well, how do we make this better? Like, people keep saying this is so wonderful, but I'm not experiencing it.
And the purpose of minimizing that time doing desk work or classroom time is to maximize the time in the activities that are going to lead the soul to its proper end.
Never confuse schooling with education.
And so
education is a much more important and vital activity that involves the formation of the soul towards its proper end than schooling ever could be. Schooling is a small component of it that deals with a certain subset of things that are knowable by the human being.
So why teach reading and writing? Because it opens you up to being able to read good books. Now, you should be reading good books to your children, but you want them to get to the point where they can read good books for themselves.
And that would include audiobooks as well.
Yes, audiobooks as well. But you want them to get to that point where, they can just, anytime that there's sort of a lull, they can pick up Tom Sawyer, which is what one of my children is currently working through. Or, they find they like the Harry Potter series and they spend the whole summer just reading through all 7. That once you give them the capacity to read.
And having discussions about them.
Yes.
Because if you have a group of people reading the same books in a very close proximity, they're going to start talking about those books. They'll talk about what happened. They'll try and understand the events because not all of them are functioning on an apprehensible level.
And the magic happens with that conversation. And
especially if you as a parent can participate in facilitating it.
And so teach them to read so that they can read the good books. You can have everyone reading them together. And then why teach to write? Well, maybe at some point they've got so many ideas that you're like, why don't you write down your thoughts about this thing?
Yeah. We've got several children who have so many ideas in their heads that they want to tell us, and we do not have the time to listen. So it's like, okay, you have this magical tool. It's called writing. Take the thoughts in your head, put them on paper or in a computer document, and then we can review and discuss that if you want to revise it, edit it, etc.
And once you've taught them handwriting and typing and composition and grammar and spelling, they have the capacity to start taking those thoughts and put them down so that you can have asynchronous conversations.
You can certainly see, I wouldn't necessarily wait to encourage them to start writing things down until you've covered those subjects.
But those are the ones that refine that ability.
Those refine that ability, but the ability that you're trying to cultivate is that thinking through the thoughts and then putting them out in a coherent manner that someone else can receive them.
And the point is that all those language arts lessons are serving the ability to do that with greater precision.
Yes, now I see where you were going.
Yes.
I lost the thread. I probably just need more coffee.
But again, why teach mathematics? Well, because there's a whole world of things that mathematics makes possible, including things like baking and cooking, because that is the intersection of math, physics, chemistry. You've got so much happening when you decide, let's bake bread together or let's work on braising dinner for tonight, that there's things going on. And if you, for example, get some Out and Brown cookbooks, you will actually have the science of what you are doing talked about. If you have to double a recipe because you're a family of 8 and nothing is ever enough food for your family size, you're doing some on-the-fly math. But other things, real things, like playing games. Playing games teach things that there isn't a school class for.
Correct. Which is why I'm such a huge advocate of board games, card games, role-playing games. They give opportunities to develop ways of thinking and habits of being in a very low-cost environment.
Problem solving, cooperation, critical thinking, strategic thinking, as well as building community.
Yes.
And so many of these are also about building the community of the family.
And fundamentally, all of this needs to be oriented towards an aesthetic formation. Humans crave beauty, and we live in a very ugly world.
Yes.
Even when you have good schooling programs in institutional schools, beauty is frequently neglected. And that aesthetic formation is really at the heart of that education project, and what the Greeks called paideia.
And part of that problem is that beauty gets sort of boxed off into, oh, well, we have an art class.
Or beauty is in the eye of the beholder and it's wholly subjective, which is also a bunch of smoldering
hooey.
Yes.
So, doing those real things, it's doing multiple things. One, it is leading you into the world of the real. It is taking those skills that you've given them, the ability to calculate, the ability to write and read, and it's having them serve something greater.
Yes.
Which is discovering and getting your hands into real things and learning from that experiential learning.
And entering the conversation.
Yes.
Every book is itself an opportunity for a conversation with an author who's not physically present. They may not be physically present in, the book is there. They may be dead thousands of years. It may be a book in translation. Mm-hmm. But it offers you an opportunity to converse with the mind that created that thing.
And so when you have this lovely idea, it's kind of overwhelming. It's like, how on earth do I make the time for it? Well, that's the way it's simple. Pare down the schoolwork that has to be done on that day to something that can be done within about 2 hours of time.
And then broaden your idea of what constitutes educational activity.
That what's being done with the rest of the day so that they're not bored. You're reading good books together. You're baking
and talking about them.
You're baking and cooking together. You're playing games together. You're working on a handicraft. You're learning woodworking or knitting or, golly, there's so many different things. I think I've got a child who wants to learn leatherworking.
We've known people who've done pewter molding and soapstone carving, candle making,
soap making. Yes, I mean, there's a world of handicrafts that you can learn, and
there are literally millions of hours of instructional YouTube videos that are out there.
And that's setting aside just straightforward art, painting, sculpting, etc.
Yeah. And maker spaces at local libraries. Yeah. I know those have become a big thing.
But that's also opening up time to get out of the house and get into nature. There's state parks, there's national parks.
Even just going to, if you live in a suburban sprawl like we do, go to a city park. I mean, I frequently went, when I was living in New Orleans, I frequently went to City Park or the Audubon Zoo. My family would take me to the Audubon Zoo frequently. When I lived in Philadelphia, there was Pennypack Park in the middle of the city. I know plenty of New Yorkers who still have, even having been away from it 20, 30 years, love talking about Central Park.
Yeah, and even in our city, we've got numerous little parks, including a couple that are basically natural areas. Mm-hmm. There's a creek, there's a couple of little identifiers of different kinds of trees and things. But
so you don't have to go far.
Yeah,
in order to find, but get out of the building, get out of the structure, and go out and experience nature. That experimental school I went to, every week, in our case, for our group of 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, it was Tuesdays. Every week, once a week, with a few exceptions, we would get on a bus in the middle of inner city Philadelphia. We'd drive out to, I think it was a Girl Scout camp that we leased space at, out in the wild, the rural areas surrounding the city of Philadelphia. And we would spend the whole day there. You bring a bag lunch, and the bag lunches were kept in coolers at the central pavilion near where we got on and off the buses. But we were sent out into the woods, and we did things like leaf identification and wildlife identification. We were required to spend time alone and quiet, writing in journals about our observations and our experiences. That was considered an essential part of our science curriculum. But there was no textbook. There were no worksheets or workbooks. There were a couple of projects like the leaf identification. That was a whole semester of collecting leaves and then learning to identify the plants the leaves came from and then compiling it into a guidebook.
But that time spent in nature, it was taking advantage of skills you had learned, like writing, like basic drawing skills, and then honing the skill of observation. And that, if you're going to study the sciences, the starting point is observation.
And wonder.
observation and wonder, and that you start with looking at things as they are. And that's what's going to open the question to say, are they always like this? What happens when this thing occurs?
You can do that even if you're in a high-rise condo in a downtown area and all you've got is a little tiny strip of balcony. Grow a thing. Grow a living thing. Get some succulents. Grow, even if you don't eat you want to plant tomatoes or something.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. Do that. Grow them.
Yeah. And then finally, visit museums, zoos, go to concerts. There's all of these things are part of education. There's a reason we had field trips, because there was a recognition that certain things can't be taught in a building.
Yeah. We're planning on a trip to the beach soon. Last year we took a trip out to the desert Southwest, and while we didn't bring a bunch of textbooks and workbooks and spend a couple of hours every day sitting in our Verbo doing bookwork, we read books. We had discussions, we ate together, we cooked together, and then we explored things. We went and saw, last fall, we went and saw Carlsbad Caverns. That led to a whole bunch of discussions about geology and cave formation and then also the excavation. How were those things discovered and excavated and uncovered?
Yes. And then that also because the caves house not one, but I think 3 different varieties of bats.
Yeah, we ended up having a whole sort of natural, it was an immersion in the natural sciences, and the kids got to see different landscapes. We did a lot of stargazing because we got so far out from the cities that the kids were able to see the night sky without light pollution. And, that's something I think I saw once or twice as a kid.
Mm-hmm. And that experience, that ability to, go out into nature, to, we also visited a national park at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
You get out and you see these things for real, and that's has a huge impact.
Yes.
And that's where real education happens, because their interest in certain kinds of bats or in a desert environment is changed by actually being there.
Watching the bats ascend at Carlsbad was just a really...
Learning that we weren't allowed to take photography of it because the electromagnetic fields from everyone's equipment upsets the bats.
It spoils their... Yeah, it confuses them and spoils their echolocation apparatus.
And so that leads you to questions about, okay, well, how do bats actually... Oh, so all of this stuff affects them. That changes your perception.
What are the consequences of cell towers and windmills and solar farms and
that leads them to start thinking about the
Wi-Fi bubbles
and how all of our conveniences affect the animals that interact with them. That thing wouldn't have happened and starting to make those connections if you're not sitting there in that little amphitheater watching them rise.
And then the subsequent discussions are where the real magic happens, because there's not a simple answer to, well, X is bad because of Y. Well, no, X is a thing, Y is a thing. X may have a certain impact on Y. Y may have a certain impact on Z. So what's the impact of X on Z? And then just talking through those things, but concretely, because humans tend to move from the concrete to the general. And a lot of schooling moves from the general and may never actually really hit the concrete because that requires time.
And time is the whole purpose here.
It's also the most precious commodity.
Exactly. And
the one non-renewable resource.
So that, I think, is going to wrap it up for this week. So to summarize, if you've been feeling crushed under the weight of an overloaded schedule, we hope that we've given you some insight into bringing it under control. You start by taking into account the needs of your family, yourself, and you're going to build the schedule around the bare minimum that is going to then allow you to have more time getting out of the house or just to getting out of the classroom and experiencing life, because real education is going to happen when you've got that opportunity for those experiences, and make the schoolwork time a servant to those experiences that are going to provide real education.
If you have any questions, you can leave a message in the comments box. You can contact us by email or through social media. All the links are going to be below in the show notes. Let us know what you'd like to hear about next. What questions do you have? Please share this with your friends. Please share this with your enemies. Please share this. Until next week, cha-cha.